This is the end of the line for your loan. I need the $100,000 you owe us paid back in full by the end of this week, Mr. Lewis, the bank's loan officer, declared sternly. We have always prided ourselves on providing exceptional meals to every customer without exception, striving daily to uphold this paramount theme. Yet all day long, we were bombarded with complaints, inquiries, and harassing phone calls. Papers accusing us of being a scam and demanding money back are plastered around the store. Stones are thrown from outside, and some hurl heartless insults. This means we can't lend any more money to a struggling restaurant. Pay back the money, you deficit-riddled trash of a restaurant. Mr. Lewis laughed loudly, displaying the cruel disregard. He embodied the worst kind of man, an arrogantly incompetent figure who understood nothing. Determined to protect our store, our customers, and our employees, I decided to send the foolish Mr. Lewis straight to an endless hell from which he could never climb out. I am Sophia, running a fine dining restaurant at the age of 71. I married Joseph, who was years my senior, when I was 30, and together we were blessed with a daughter, Grace. 40 years have passed since then. Grace is now married and has left home, and Joseph is no longer with us. This fine dining restaurant, passed down through Joseph's family for generations, has mostly been left to me, as most of his relatives have passed away due to old age, with no younger generations to take over. Running a restaurant is harder than one might think, and every day is unbelievably busy. But I am supported by loyal customers who have been with us for years and suppliers who provide us with fresh ingredients. I find fulfillment and motivation to keep going. This restaurant is filled with my dreams, and the employees working here are like family to me. I am firmly determined to protect their livelihoods, no matter what happens. It was about 3 years ago that I took over this restaurant from Joseph, right around the time Grace got married. At that time, a pandemic was spreading worldwide, causing the restaurant's finances to dwindle into the red. During these tough times, I managed to keep the business afloat, thanks to Mr. Walker, a banker who believed in me and continued to provide loans. Mr. Walker's bank has been taking care of Joseph's family for generations. When I took over, Mr. Walker was assigned to handle our account. A man of 45, unmarried, he has a gentle demeanor and a flexible mindset. He accommodated our business strategies, allowing us to receive loans and keep paying our employees without delay, keeping us open to this day. Now, Mr. Walker is being transferred overseas. Mr. Walker, when will you be leaving for the overseas branch? I asked him today. In about a month. Don't worry, I'll make sure everything is properly handed over, he reassured me. Modestly attributing his promotion to his bachelor status, I know well his competence from our consultations about loans. His promotion is truly a significant achievement, and I am genuinely happy for him. My main concern now is who will take over from Mr. Walker. That's when Mr. Lewis was introduced as his successor. At 29, Mr. Lewis holds the position of section chief. Handsome and exuding confidence, he greeted me saying, "William Lewis, I'll take good care of you and the restaurant." His fresh smile offered reassurance. Relieved by Mr. Lewis's smile, I saw off Mr. Walker to his overseas assignment without any reservations. However, during Mr. Lewis's visits alone, I began to notice subtle signs. When I offered him coffee, just as I did for Mr. Walker, he muttered something under his breath and clicked his tongue disapprovingly. "So outdated," he commented once, though when I glanced at him, he quickly smiled afresh. I dismissed it then as a misunderstanding. 2 days later, Mr. Lewis visited again, and I served him coffee as usual. With his smile, he remarked, "I'm not fond of coffee when I can't identify the brand, and who knows who's used this cup before. If you want to serve me coffee, please prepare it in a specified brand and cup." Shocked momentarily, I struggled to understand his demeanor, contrasting sharply with Mr. Walker's warm approach. I froze as Mr. Lewis continued speaking, seemingly unconcerned with my feelings. "I don't know what arrangements you had with Mr. Walker for your loans, but I have my own approach. As an elite, please understand that I may not extend further loans." With a careless tap on his laptop, he avoided eye contact and condescended with a smile. "I've had extensive discussions with Mr. Walker and devised a meticulous business plan. Have you had a chance to review it?" I managed a feeble response. Mr. Lewis's expression shifted visibly as he sighed, his tone curt. "That was with Mr. Walker. I have my own methods. Is there really a need to discuss it further? Regardless of your plan, if it's consistently in the red, what's the use?" His demeanor had completely shifted from his usual affable smile, as if he were a different person. Stunned and unable to respond, I found myself at a loss. Your account seems to have hardly any funds. How do you plan to repay? He smirked. This building looks ancient too. Can you afford renovations if needed? I'm hesitant to extend loans to such establishments. With that, Mr. Lewis abruptly left the shop. Was this the same Mr. Lewis who had previously greeted me with warm smiles? Was this his true nature all along? I remained motionless for a while, grappling with his abrupt departure and cutting remarks. However, I steeled myself. I couldn't allow Mr. Lewis's words to shake my resolve. I had a responsibility to protect my restaurant and its employees. Buoyed by determination, our staff rallied and went above and beyond, resulting in excellent sales for the shop. I refused to let Mr. Lewis have the final say. As the shop's sales began to stabilize, a newly hired employee rushed over to me in a panic. Sophia, you need to see this. He handed me his phone, and I adjusted my glasses to read the screen. I couldn't conceal my shock at what I saw, a scathing social media post criticizing the restaurant. This place is awful. The fish and vegetables weren't fresh. I demand a refund. The staff, especially an older woman, were the worst. This so-called fine dining restaurant is more like a scam. Though the post didn't name our restaurant directly, there was a photo of our exterior attached. It's spreading on social media, the employee added urgently. I just found out about it this morning, and it's awful, he said, his voice quivering slightly. It was infuriating. This restaurant, from the ingredients to every aspect of our service, is run with great care. We aim to provide the best dining experience for every visitor, without exception. Every day, both I and the staff work tirelessly to ensure that our guests leave feeling happy, satisfied, and having had the best experience possible. There's no way such a post could be justified, and I can't imagine any of our guests making such a claim. Other employees reported that the restaurant had become a topic of discussion on social media. All day long, we were besieged by complaints, inquiries, and harassing calls. Papers accusing us of fraud and demanding money were plastered around the shop. Some even threw stones and hurled cruel words, he continued. 3 days after the social media posts, we were in a situation where we couldn't operate at all. I knew from various news stories that social media could be a tool for inflicting pain on people, but experiencing the attacks firsthand, I truly understood the horror of social media. As I tried to make sense of why this was happening, one of the employees came to me with a suggestion. I was surprised to hear what he proposed. It might be possible if it's him, he said. I immediately contacted someone, and the person on the other end readily agreed to my proposal. If there are people who use social media to attack, there are also those who know how to defend against such attacks. Feeling despondent wasn't going to help. I had to protect this shop. I decided to temporarily close the shop until this turmoil subsided, to protect our regular customers and employees. Of course, I intended to ensure the employees' wages during this time. Then Mr. Lewis called. Oh, you decided to close the shop. It's pretty bad right now, huh? The fraudulent fine dining restaurant, right? Terrible. But it's just karma coming back to you. Maybe it's best if you just close the shop for good. Could these really be the words of an elite banker who graduated from a prestigious university? He must have risen through the ranks by neglecting struggling businesses and catering only to profitable clients. I had only one thing to say to Mr. Lewis. I will absolutely protect this restaurant, our customers, and our employees, I replied firmly. Mr. Lewis responded curtly. Instead of just saying nice words, pay back the money you owe, and hung up the phone. I swore to myself that I would protect everything, no matter what. Eventually, the restaurant had to close for about 2 weeks. The damage during that time was not insignificant, but with the support of our employees, partners, and loyal customers who rallied behind us, we managed to reopen. Upon hearing of our reopening, Mr. Lewis came to the restaurant, wearing a sleazy smile. Is this your last day of business? Well, good luck, he remarked, looking around and making rude comments as usual. What brings you here at this time of day, Mr. Lewis? I asked, to which he sneered. I'm hosting a very important client today. For some reason, they chose this place, so I had no choice. It was convenient since I had something to discuss with you too. With that, he took a seat at the best table without waiting to be invited. Make sure you serve well today. I have a very important guest coming. Mr. Lewis, what is your business today? I thought the repayment date was still a while away. I inquired cautiously. I've decided to cut off your loan. I need the $100,000 you owe us paid back in full by the end of this week, Mr. Lewis declared with finality. Is the branch manager or Mr. Walker aware of this? I asked, hoping for some reprieve. I've said this multiple times, but this is my decision. Mr. Walker has nothing to do with it. Just understand that we can't lend any more money to a struggling restaurant, Mr. Lewis replied callously. Pay back the money, you deficit-riddled trash of a restaurant, he added, laughing loudly. Pay back the $100,000. Sure, but you regret it, I said firmly, meeting his gaze. For a moment, Mr. Lewis' face turned serious, but then he chuckled again. Such a despicable man, an elitist, incompetent figure who understood nothing. I decided that Mr. Lewis deserved to be banished straight to hell, a place from which he could never escape, I thought to myself as I addressed him. So, with the next repayment, our business dealings with your bank will be concluded, correct? Yes, just make sure you pay it back. I don't want to have anything more to do with such a restaurant anymore, Mr. Lewis said, sitting pompously. I'd like him to disappear because he's a sore, but I can't bother the guests who are said to be coming. When will your guests be arriving, Mr. Lewis? I asked, prompting Mr. Lewis to start bragging confidently. You wouldn't meet someone like my guests in your entire life, even how poor you are. He's the president of the most talked about IT company right now, so he's busy. He'll contact me when he's arriving. I'm just waiting until then, Mr. Lewis boasted. I figured he hadn't secured a definite appointment but kept quiet, knowing his smugness was only temporary. A lucrative deposit transaction with that IT company was clearly in sight for him. Mr. Lewis kept checking his mobile phone anxiously as he waited for his guests. It's such an empty shop after all that publicity. No one would come to a place like this, Mr. Lewis remarked. I swallowed my retort and ignored him. Then, a lively greeting from an employee echoed through the restaurant. Well, some odd customers do come to such places, huh? I remarked pointedly, ignoring Mr. Lewis completely. I went to welcome the customers at the entrance who turned out to be Carter, the fish wholesaler we've been dealing with for years, and Dylan, a farmer. Sophia, we were worried after seeing the posts on social media. We were irritated to see even our proud produce being bad-mouthed, Carter said, holding an abundance of fresh fish while Dylan had just picked vegetables in his hands. Their beautiful ingredients received a joyful welcome from the staff. Don't worry, Sophia, we'll blow away those sneaky rumors, Dylan assured me, snapping photos with his mobile phone. We'll broadcast about these ingredients and ensure no more nonsense stories come up. Mr. Lewis looked uncomfortable at these words. Just then, someone approached him. What's wrong, Mr. Lewis? You look upset, Mr. Walker said, surprising Mr. Lewis. It was as if he couldn't believe Mr. Walker was there. Mr. Walker, you've come all the way here. I greeted him warmly, relieved to see a familiar face. When I heard you were in trouble, the branch manager asked me to come to stop William's rampage, Mr. Walker said sharply, glancing at Mr. Lewis. William, I hear you've been saying you're going to cut off the loan. Mr. Lewis appeared slightly shaken under Mr. Walker's gaze but quickly started to argue. Mr. Walker, you've done wrong too, handing over such a continuously loss-making restaurant to me. With the recent social media issue, this restaurant is finished, right? I've decided to terminate the loan, judging it as beyond recovery, Mr. Lewis stated firmly. Hearing this, Mr. Walker shook his head in disbelief. You don't understand anything. It's not Sophia who will suffer from the loan being cut off. It's the bank. Mr. Lewis looked at Mr. Walker with a surprised expression. Mr. Walker continued speaking. Didn't you see earlier? This restaurant has long been in good standing with well-known and reputable suppliers. Not only that, but it's also partnered with some of the country's leading entertainment agencies and sports organizations, ensuring future profitability. It's all thanks to my husband's connections. Yes, everyone has been so kind to us, and we're grateful for that. We're also planning major events with our partner companies. Didn't you read that in the business plan? I interjected, adding a hint of sarcasm. Mr. Lewis countered sharply. Partnerships, you say? But those are just your husband's connections, right? And he's not around anymore. In the long run, who knows how long those will last? Besides, with all this commotion, it seems the producers have already taken care of that. Moreover, the malicious social media posts appear to have been deliberately written with ill intent, so explaining the situation should clear things up with the other party, Mr. Walker explained calmly. Mr. Lewis still looked unsatisfied. You don't have much in your bank or anyone else's. How do you plan to pay your employees and expenses without our loan? I didn't want to reveal everything to this man, but it couldn't be helped now. I've always preferred not to hold much cash. Most of my assets are in land, apartments, and gold. So if we can no longer receive loans, I'll just convert a bit of gold into cash, Mr. Walker stated, delivering the harsh reality check to Mr. Lewis. In other words, by your arrogant mistake, you've squandered significant benefits that Sophia could have brought to the bank. Mr. Lewis turned pale upon hearing this. Sophia, I'm sorry for making you go through this unpleasantness, he muttered. The branch manager who appointed William as my successor deeply regrets it. He had high hopes for William and is disappointed. He plans to come and apologize in person. Mr. Walker bowed deeply to me. Neither Mr. Walker nor the branch manager were at fault in that sense. I, too, was to blame for being fooled by Mr. Lewis' initially charming demeanor. But that's a different story. Mr. Lewis, who had hurt my shop, my employees, and everyone involved, needed to face further consequences. Mr. Lewis, you've been talking about the restaurant causing a fuss, but you're the one who initiated it, aren't you? I confronted him directly. He turned away, pretending not to know. Even if Mr. Lewis wouldn't confess, we had solid evidence. Andrew, would you come here, please? I called over a man. Andrew, my daughter Grace's husband. Andrew began speaking in front of Mr. Lewis. We investigated the critical posts about this restaurant. While the details are confidential, we identified the IP address and found it originated from Mr. Lewis's mobile phone. Mr. Lewis' face contorted. Normally, people post from more difficult to trace devices. It's bold of you to post from your own mobile phone, Andrew remarked sarcastically. So what? Posting something doesn't make it a crime. There's something called freedom of expression. Don't get so smug over something like this, Mr. Lewis retorted, clearly unnerved. When someone posts content on social media that damages a store's reputation, it can be subject to defamation laws. It might also infringe on laws against insult or business interference, Andrew explained calmly. We'll consult with a lawyer about this part later. I never imagined we could pinpoint the culprit behind the social media attacks. An employee suggested it might be possible, knowing Andrew's capabilities as the president of a highly renowned IT company. My words seemed to strike Mr. Lewis particularly hard. Speaking of which, Andrew, didn't you mention you had a meeting scheduled here today? Has your guest arrived yet? I asked, though I knew I was being somewhat pointed. Yet this level of vindication was mild compared to the malice we endured. It seems they have arrived, Andrew replied calmly. But there's no need for further discussion. Nice to meet you, Mr. Lewis. I'm Andrew, the one you were supposed to meet regarding our company's deposit. I'll be voiding that agreement. Mr. Lewis' face contorted noticeably. Before he could react, Andrew continued, It seems Sophia has been greatly assisted by you. Mr. Lewis collapsed to his knees right then and there. Eventually, the branch manager, contacted by Mr. Walker, arrived to take Mr. Lewis away. The branch manager deeply apologized, promising to visit again later to celebrate the restaurant's reopening. Longtime regulars and supportive customers gathered afterward, making it the liveliest day the restaurant had seen in a long time. Mr. Walker, who had returned from overseas, informed me about Mr. Lewis' fate. He faced significant claims for damages. Despite the cancellation of my loan and the deposit agreement orchestrated by Mr. Lewis and about to be finalized by the branch manager, I remained grateful to the bank. If not for Mr. Lewis' interference, I would have liked to continue our transactions. As a final act of defiance, Mr. Lewis lingered at the bank for a while, achieving an early promotion to section chief and aspiring to become a department head. His luck ran out, however, when he targeted our restaurant to diminish its reputation and sales by posting malicious reviews on social media. His selfish and malicious intent soon caught up with him, resulting in a transfer to a regional bank. Shortly, he would receive a legal notice from me detailing charges of defamation and business interference. The weight of his actions, hurting others for personal gain, would haunt him for life. On a brighter note, I was approaching 72 years old. Despite everything, my loyal customers continued to visit, and our partnerships with suppliers remained strong. All the employees continued to show up for work diligently. Preparations for the events outlined in our business plan progressed steadily. However, I couldn't deny that my body wasn't as cooperative as it used to be. Just as I contemplated retirement, Grace stepped up with a heartfelt offer. "Mom, I'm always ready to take over. Take a break whenever you want," Grace said earnestly. Her offer made me reconsider retiring and moving overseas to be with Joseph. Reflecting on my life, I realized how much support I'd received over the years. With this in mind, retirement seemed further away than ever. I resolved to dedicate the rest of my life to giving back and nurturing my dream.